To be honest, I've just been dying to tell you about this week's video. Sorry, I just really wanted to make that pun. I've been thinking about it all week. In case you couldn't tell, this week I'm going to be talking about how I dyed all of the yarn that I'm going to be using as the main color for my 1890s hand-knit biking ensemble. The pattern instructs that the main color of the sweater should be a blue and the contrasting color a tan. And in order to hit the gauge that I needed a specific width of yarn, but that I couldn't find in a price range that was kind of reasonable for the amount of yarn that I needed in the color blue that I was looking for. To tell you a little bit more about the color blue I was looking for, I can take out this little yarn sample sheet from Fleischer's. This is from the 1920s, and in it has a lot of sample cards of different colors, and I was kind of looking for, like, this is the classic blue, but I really love the Asteria and French blues. I have previously on this channel dyed yarn with natural woad to get an indigo blue color. It was beautiful, but it was a huge process, and I am no longer in the area where woad grows naturally, and it's also not the season for woad, unfortunately, which is why I turned to food coloring, and I also turned to ChemKnits' dyeing tutorials. Let's go to me when I was dyeing. No, that doesn't sound right, but let's go to me when I was trying to change the color of my yarn. Welcome to my kitchen. It's time to test out some of the food coloring techniques on the yarn. I have 4 scraps of yarn soaking right now, and I'm gonna start getting some water kind of simmering on the stove together with my vinegar. Sorry, you might hear my laundry going in the background. So I can do some ratio tests to see exactly what amount of color to yarn do I want to get kind of that nice deep blue that I'm looking for. What's important for this dyeing process to work is that we have heat, acid, and dye. So the dye I'm going to be using is food coloring, which is a nice one to be able to use all of your cooking pots and pans because everything you're using is food safe. We are simmering on all of our pots, so I'm going to go ahead and add the dye and then the yarn. I dyed my alpaca yarn scraps with different concentrations of just blue food coloring and a combination of blue and black food coloring, and I really liked the depth of color that the extra black food coloring added. So when it was time to batch dye all of my yarn together, I just threw everything I had tested out the window and dyed it with a completely different dark blue food coloring. So I don't know how helpful the tests were for me other than to prove that dyeing with food coloring was possible, because I ended up just not following the example that I had tried in the first place. I followed ChemKnits' tutorial on batch dyeing large amounts of yarn all together in one dye lot because I didn't want to split my different balls of yarn across dye lots. And as I said before, you need acid, heat, and dye to dye these animal fibers. I'm using an alpaca yarn here, and I just left it for a longer amount of time as ChemKnits suggested, which was a few days in this dye bath with as hot a water as I could manage. After letting my dye bath sit for a few days with the yarn in it, it was time to drain out the dye and wash the yarn. You don't want to wash the yarn too aggressively because that will make it felt, but I did want to wash all of the dye that hadn't really bonded with the fiber off of it because I don't want my hands to turn any more blue than they already are as part of this process while I'm knitting, and I want my outfit to be color fast. So I rinsed and I rinsed and I rinsed and I washed these yarns over and over again. I tried to be as gentle as I could and I used as cold water as I could to prevent felting, but I just kept getting more and more dye coming off of this yarn. And of course I managed to felt my yarn together, and I decided that this was a failed process. So I re-soaked all of my yarn in conditioner to try to maybe help unfelt the yarn. This is what the yarn looked like fully dry after soaking it in conditioner. And when yarn felts, you can see that it kind of sticks to each other and isn't fluffy and floofy and easy to unwind anymore. I was really afraid that I was going to lose this amount of yarn, so that's why I did the conditioner soak to help untangle the fibers a little bit, and I wound up all of my loose hanks or skeins back into a ball. You can see here how the felting is really gripping the strands of the yarn together. It was a long and difficult process to untangle these skeins from each other, put them back into balls, and then from the balls put them back into the skeins and let them air dry for an even longer period of time, just to be 100% sure that before I start dyeing again, that my skeins are not felted. It ended up working and I was really glad for it. It ended up being this like light and floofy hanks and skeins again, which is how it's supposed to look. It's not supposed to look felted and stuck together. And I tried dyeing one more time, hopefully this time in a color fast way. Now I'm dyeing 10 skeins of yarn all at the same time, or I was attempting to. So I went out and I bought myself the biggest pot that I could find so that I could batch as many of these skeins together as I could when I was re-dyeing these yarns. My theory was that I just didn't have enough consistent heat in the yarn mixture, the dyeing bath before, and so maybe if I do it on the stove this time, it would really help the yarn absorb the color. And here you can see in the time lapse of one of these batches that the yarn is really soaking up the color that's in the bath, and this time the color is color fast, so it did actually stick to the yarn without washing out when I rinsed it. No matter how much I washed the yarn, I did not get any dye bleeding out of it. The yarns ended up being this beautiful deep blue color. From the first kind of failed dyeing process, it also added a little bit more of the purpley hues, which I thought were really beautiful. And holding up the yarn that I dyed against the Fleischer's yarn sample, I think I succeeded in turning it into that deeper blue that I was looking for, maybe leaning towards sapphire. I don't know, what do you think? What kind of blue do you think that I managed to get? I personally always appreciate when I'm watching yarn dyeing videos, seeing the yarn spun up into a ball or wound up into a ball and then knit into a sample. So I hope that you enjoy seeing this yarn dyeing process and the finished result, which I am already knitting up into the sweater. I can't wait to show you more progress of this whole 1890s Viking project. The sweater won't be the next item that you're seeing. It just takes a long time to knit up a sweater, which is why I am already starting. But I hope that you will continue to join me on this journey as I continue to knit more pieces. So feel free to subscribe if you'd like, and I will see you all again very soon. Bye!